In the Ottoman system, nothing was wasted. Not stone, not steel, not even faith. This was a proverb whispered in the chancelleries of Venice, a fearful acknowledgment of an empire that consumed everything. While sultans measured their power in territory and gold, their viziers understood a deeper truth. The most valuable resource was the human soul. To conquer a man's body was temporary. To conquer his belief was to conquer his bloodline. In the shadow of the Bosnian highlands, late in the 15th century, the isolated Orthodox monastery of St. Paraskeva was about to learn the true meaning of this philosophy. The bells of their chapel had fallen silent 3 days prior, not by force but by the will of the abbess Mother Theodora. She would not give the invaders the satisfaction of silencing them. Now, the small community of 28 nuns waited in the scriptorium, the air thick with the smell of beeswax and the metallic tang of fear. The only sound was the wind, howling through the empty bell tower, carrying with it the distant, rhythmic thud of Ottoman cannon fire, drawing closer with the slow inevitability of a glacier. Outside their walls, the world was ending. Inside, they held their breath, clutching wooden crosses that felt as cold and useless as bone. They prayed for a quick death. They prayed for martyrdom. History, however, reveals that the empire had something far more meticulous in mind. What was coming was not a massacre. It was an appropriation. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? The gates did not splinter under the blast of cannon. They were opened. A disciplined detachment of Sipahis rode into the courtyard, their chainmail whispering, their horses steaming in the cold mountain air. They were followed by a man on a black charger, a man who wore no armor, only robes of dark wool and a face of profound, chilling intelligence. This was Zaganos Pasha, the Sultan's defterdar, his treasurer, a man who saw the world not as a map of kingdoms, but as a ledger of assets. He dismounted, not with the swagger of a conqueror, but with the quiet purpose of an auditor. His Janissary guard, men born as Christians themselves, secured the perimeter with terrifying efficiency. The abbess, Mother Theodora, met him at the chapel door, her body rigid, her gaze defiant. She held her silver-bound Bible like a shield. "This is a house of God," she declared, her voice echoing in the sudden quiet. Zaganos Pasha merely glanced at the Bible, then at her. He saw not a woman of God, but an instrument of discipline. He saw the spotless courtyard, the neatly tended herb garden, the rigid formation of the nuns who had gathered behind her, trembling but unbroken. He saw an order. An order was a thing he could use. He turned to his captain. "No plunder," he commanded in a low voice. "Burn the icons, melt the silver, but the women are to be preserved. They are an experiment." Mother Theodora's blood ran cold. Preserved. The word hung in the air, heavier and more suffocating than the smoke that now began to curl from the burning chapel. The journey was the first stage of their unmaking. They were not marched in chains or paraded through conquered towns. That would have been a spectacle, and Zaganos Pasha detested waste. Instead, they were loaded into covered wagons, their windows sealed, plunging them into a suffocating, rattling darkness. They were moved only at night. For weeks, they lost all sense of time and direction, their world reduced to the rumble of wheels, the muffled shouts of guards, and the smell of straw and sweat. Sister Anna, the youngest novice, tried to keep track of the days by whispering the morning matins prayer, but her voice soon faltered, the familiar words dissolving in the disorienting gloom. They were fed. They were given water. They were not brutalized. This systematic lack of violence was, in itself, a form of horror. It denied them the martyrdom they had been prepared for. They were not prisoners of war. They were cargo. When the wagon doors were finally unbarred, the sudden, blinding light of the sun was a physical blow. They were no longer in the green, pine-scented mountains of Bosnia. They were on a coast, the air heavy with salt and the shriek of gulls. Before them lay the turquoise expanse of the Aegean Sea, and anchored in the bay was a single, grim transport ship. As they were herded toward the dock, Mother Theodora realized the truth. They were not being taken to Constantinople to be sold in the slave markets. They were being taken elsewhere. They called it Akkada, the White Island. It was a sun-scorched sliver of rock and chalk, a former Byzantine leper colony repurposed by the Ottoman state. Its white cliffs rose from the sea like broken teeth, accessible only by a single, narrow harbor defended by a stone tower. The island was a place designed to be forgotten. There was no village, no market, only a sprawling compound built of the same blinding white stone. It was not a dungeon. It was something far more sinister, a laboratory. The air was sterile, scoured clean by the relentless wind. As the nuns were marched into the compound, they were not met by soldiers, but by silent women in unmarked gray tunics, their faces devoid of expression. The Effendi, the island's overseer, was a man who had been a scholar in Cairo. He greeted them not with threats, but with a ledger. One by one, their names were spoken and then crossed out. Mother Theodora, he read, dipping his pen. You are no longer Theodora, you are number 7. The nuns were stripped of their black habits, the woolen garments of their identity. Their hair, which some had not shown to another living soul since their vows, was shorn and burned. They were washed in caustic lye soap that erased the scent of their old lives and dressed in the same coarse, gray tunics as the others. Their language, their Slavic tongue, was forbidden. Speaking it was punishable by isolation. Their prayers were forbidden. The gesture of crossing oneself was punishable by isolation. They had entered a world without God, a world of silent, antiseptic horror. The rules of Akkad were not designed to inflict pain, but to systematically dismantle the self. The compound was a clockwork of meticulous routine. The nuns, now only numbers, rose before dawn, not to the sound of a chapel bell but to the harsh clang of an iron bar. They spent their days in labor, weaving rough cloth for janissary uniforms, grinding grain, and tending the island's sparse olive groves. But the true labor was psychological. They were forced to attend lessons in a whitewashed hall. Here the Effendi or his assistants taught them Ottoman Turkish, not the lyrical language of the poets, but a functional, precise vocabulary of command and obedience. They were taught the logistics of the empire, the hierarchy of the court, the principles of state bureaucracy. They were being re-educated. Any lingering trace of their past was targeted. When Sister Anna was found tracing a cross into the dust of the weaving loom, she was not beaten. She was taken to the Ses's Oda, the silent room. It was a cell dug into the chalk with no light and no sound. She was left there for 3 days with only water. When she emerged, blinking and stumbling, she was no longer Sister Anna. She was number 22, and she understood. Overt defiance was a path to madness. The only way to survive was to hollow oneself out, to become as gray and silent as the tunics they wore. After 6 months of this relentless quiet pressure, Zaganos Pasha returned. He came to inspect his experiment. He found the 28 women, now 26, as 2 had succumbed to despair and starved themselves working in the courtyard. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, their faces blank. He gathered them in the lecture hall, the Effendi at his side. He walked slowly before them, his gaze assessing each hollowed-out expression. You have been cleansed, he stated, his voice calm. Former lives, your superstitions. They are a disease we have cured, but we did not destroy you. We preserved your greatest quality, your discipline. The devotion you wasted on a dead carpenter you will now give to the future. He paused, letting the horror of his words settle. The Sultan's devshirm, the blood tax, gathers hundreds of Christian boys from the Balkans each year. They are brought to the capital, taught our ways, and become the Sultan's most loyal servants. But the transition is inefficient. They are full of fear, memory, and rebellious faith. They need mothers to shepherd them. They need you. The revelation landed like a shroud. This was the fate beyond death. They were not to be slaves. They were to be the instruments of cultural erasure. These holy women who had vowed to be mothers to the church would now be forced to become the mothers of the Janissaries, teaching the next generation of Christian-born boys how to forget their own God. The first transport of boys arrived with the autumn storms. They were small, between the ages of 8 and 12, ripped from their Serbian, Greek, and Albanian homes. They huddled on the deck of the ship, terrified, clutching hidden crosses and fragments of prayer beads. The nuns in their gray tunics were ordered to line the dock. The Effendi gave the command. Number 7, he said to Mother Theodora. This one is yours. He refuses to speak. Make him. A small, dark-haired boy was shoved forward. He was weeping, whispering a name, Maddie, Maddie. Mother Theodora, her face a mask of stone, looked at the child. She saw his small, dirty hand clutching a crudely carved wooden cross. For a moment the entire island held its breath. The old abbess looked at the boy, then at the effendi, and then at the gray, indifferent sea. She knelt, placing her hand not on the boy's head in blessing, but on his fist. Slowly she uncurled his fingers. She took the small wooden cross from his grasp. The boy let out a choked sob. Theodora did not throw it into the sea. She did not break it. She simply held it, looked the boy dead in the eyes, and said in perfect, cold Turkish, "That word is not permitted. That object is not permitted. Your new name is Murad. Welcome to your new life." Sister Anna, number 22, watched, and a part of her soul fractured. The abbess had not just submitted. She had become the master of the new order. The experiment was a horrifying success. Zaganos Pasha had been correct. The nuns, with their ingrained authority and their deep understanding of childhood devotion, were brutally effective. They knew exactly which rituals to break, which words to forbid, which memories to surgically excise. They became the matrons of the White Island, a silent, gray priesthood dedicated to the unmaking of Christian children. They taught the boys Turkish. They supervised their conversion. They enforced the rules with the same unyielding discipline that had once governed their convent. They were more effective than any harsh Janissary Agha because they did not use violence. They used the same psychological tools of shame, isolation, and the withholding of affection that had been used on them. They broke the boys' hearts with a chilling, maternal precision. Mother Theodora, now known only as the Bash Kadin, the head woman, ran the island with an iron will. She gained the full trust of the effendi. She was given private quarters. She advised on the curriculum. She had become the perfect, hollowed-out tool of the Ottoman state, a testament to Zaganos Pasha's vision. The other nuns followed her lead, their faces becoming harder, their movements more robotic. They were ghosts, tending to the creation of other ghosts. But beneath the surface of number 22, something different was happening. Anna had not broken. She had calcified. Anna's, number 22's, assigned duty was the olive grove. It was the one place on the island where solitude was permitted. The chalky soil was poor, the trees ancient and gnarled, but they produced the oil for the compound. While the other nuns managed the dormitories and classrooms, Anna worked the earth. It was here, shielded from the eyes of the effendi and the other matrons, that her resistance began. It was not a grand rebellion. It was an act of memory, a desperate, secret liturgy. The sharp shard of rock she began to carve. Into the bark of the oldest, most hidden olive trees she etched the symbols of her stolen faith. They were tiny, almost invisible, a fish, a Cairo, a simplified icon of the Theotokos. She carved the initials of the two sisters who had died. She carved her own name. Ana, it was a gospel of defiance, written not in ink, but in scars on living wood. When she was assigned to supervise the boys during their brief recreation, she would bring them to the grove. While she taught them their Turkish vocabulary, tree, leaf, sky, she would press their small hands against the bark. She would use the olive oil to trace a cross on their foreheads, disguising it as a game, a blessing for strong soldiers. She was reseeding the very faith she was ordered to destroy, planting it like a time bomb in the hearts of the Sultan's future elite. Years bled into decades. The White Island became a legend, a crucial, secret hub in the Devshirme system. The effendi grew old and was replaced. Zaganos Pasha died a wealthy man in Constantinople, his experiment lauded in private circles. Mother Theodora, the Bash Kadin, was now an ancient, blind woman, revered and feared within the compound. She still ruled, her voice a dry whisper that carried absolute authority. Anna, number 22, was also old, her hands gnarled like the olive trees she tended. The grove was now a sacred library of scars, a testament to hundreds of forgotten names and a faith that refused to die. One night, a sickness swept the island. Anna lay dying on her simple cot. The new matrons, women who had once been boys she had blessed, tended to her with a strange, respectful silence. In her final hours, the blind Mother Theodora was led to her bedside. The room was silent save for the wind. "You defied me," Theodora whispered, her voice too low for anyone else to hear. "I saw your work in the trees." Anna met her gaze, her own eyes clear. And you became their monster. Why? Theodora's ruined face seemed to collapse. To survive, no, that was the first day I did it. Because they were my children. She pointed a shaking finger at a young Agha, a Janissary commander visiting from the capital, a man who had grown up on this island. He is one of yours, Anna. He is now one of the most powerful men in the empire. The blind woman leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. He still carries the olive pit you gave him. He thinks it's a talisman. I let him. I let you. I built the cage and... but you poisoned the birds. Zaganos Pasha wanted to erase their god. Instead, we have created a new one. A secret faith hidden inside the Sultan's own walls. It is a heresy of memory, a cult of the cross and the crescent, a thing of pure survival. Is it God's work or ours? I no longer know. Anna looked past her toward the young commander who stood by the door, a product of their dual, opposing wills. He was watching them, his hand resting on the hilt of his yataghan, and with his other thumb he idly, unconsciously traced the sign of a fish onto the wooden doorframe. Anna saw it. The horror and the terrible, twisted hope of it. Her faith had not been erased, it had been mutated. It had survived, but as something new, something the church would never recognize. It was a faith for ghosts. Anna closed her eyes, and the sound of the wind merged with the faint, imagined echo of a chapel bell. The island continued its work, a machine for the soul, but in its gears a new, strange seed had taken root. History only recorded the White Island as a footnote, a successful administrative center. But the trees remembered. If you want more dark historical stories like this, subscribe to Dark Legends and keep the past from being erased.